Every person in this video made a decision, not a dramatic decision, not a moment of panic or poor judgment under pressure. A small decision, the kind you make without thinking, the kind that feels so insignificant that you forget you made it at all. That decision killed them, or it almost killed them. Some of the people in this video survived. They lived because something, luck or timing, or the random chance of a hiker passing by at the right moment, intervened between their mistake and its consequences. The others were not so fortunate. I have spent months reviewing search and rescue reports, interviewing first responders, and analyzing cases from national parks and wilderness areas across the United States. What I found was not what I expected. These were not stories of inexperience or recklessness. Many of the missing were veterans of the outdoors. They had decades of trail miles behind them. They knew the rules because they had followed those rules successfully their entire lives. They died anyway. But here is what I also discovered. In nearly every case, there was a moment, a specific point in the timeline where a different choice would have changed everything. The person did not see that moment because it did not feel like a moment. It felt like nothing, a slight deviation from the plan, a minor adjustment that seemed reasonable at the time. By the end of this video, you will recognize those moments. You will understand why they matter, and you will have the knowledge to make different choices when your own moment arrives, because it will arrive. If you spend enough time in the wilderness, it always does. This is not a collection of tragedies. This is a manual. Every case comes with lessons. Every death comes with knowledge that can keep you alive. Pay attention. Your life may depend on it. The shortcut looked like a trail. Mitchell Crawford was 34 years old, an experienced hiker from Denver who had spent his weekends exploring the mountains of Colorado since his early 20s. He was in excellent physical condition. He understood weather patterns, altitude effects, and the importance of preparation. He carried a day pack with water, food, a first aid kit, and rain gear. He had told his girlfriend exactly where he was going and when he expected to return. He did everything right. Almost. On October 12, 2022, Mitchell drove to Zion National Park in Utah for a long weekend of hiking. His plan was to complete Angel's Landing on Saturday, spend Sunday recovering at his campsite, and drive home Monday morning. Angel's Landing is one of the most famous hikes in the American Southwest, a steep trail that climbs to a narrow ridge overlooking Zion Canyon. The trail is challenging but well-maintained, with chains installed at the most exposed sections to help hikers navigate safely. Mitchell reached the summit around 11 in the morning after a straightforward ascent. He spent an hour at the top, photographing the canyon, eating his lunch, watching the endless parade of hikers making their way up and down the chains. The weather was perfect. Clear sky, temperature in the mid-60s, light wind. He felt strong. He felt confident. He started his descent around noon. The main trail down from Angel's Landing follows the same route as the ascent, a well-marked path that thousands of people navigate safely every day. But approximately halfway down, Mitchell noticed what appeared to be an alternative route, a narrow trail branching off to the left, cutting through a stand of juniper trees and descending more directly toward the canyon floor. From where he stood, it looked like a legitimate path. The ground was worn. The vegetation had been pushed back. It had all the visual characteristics of a maintained trail. It was not a maintained trail. It was a deer path, a route created by animals over years of passage, leading nowhere useful for humans. Mitchell did not know this. He saw a shortcut. He was tired from the climb. The official trail wound back and forth in a series of switchbacks that would take another hour to complete. The deer path appeared to drop directly down, potentially saving significant time and effort. He took it. For the first 200 yards, the path held. The footing was loose but manageable. The grade was steep, but not impossible. Mitchell congratulated himself on finding this faster route. He wondered why more hikers did not use it. He found out approximately 10 minutes later. The deer path ended at a cliff, not a dramatic precipice, but a vertical drop of perhaps 20 feet, too far to jump safely, too steep to climb down. Mitchell looked left and right for a way around. The terrain in both directions was choked with vegetation and broken by irregular rock formations. He could see no obvious route forward. He decided to go back. He would rejoin the main trail and take the switchbacks like everyone else. It would be embarrassing, but it was the sensible choice, except he could not find his way back. The deer path had been faint coming down. Going up, it was nearly invisible. The juniper trees all looked identical. The rock formations offered no landmarks. Mitchell walked for 30 minutes, then an hour, trying to retrace his steps. He found himself in a narrow drainage that he did not recognize. He climbed out of the drainage and found himself on a ridge that looked nothing like where he had started. By 3 in the afternoon, Mitchell Crawford was lost in Zion National Park, less than a mile from one of the most heavily traveled trails in the system. He was not found for 9 days. What saved Mitchell was a decision he made after the first hour of wandering. He stopped. He found a shaded spot beneath an overhang, sat down, and forced himself to think. He was lost. That was a fact he could not change. He had water for perhaps a day, food for 2 days, and no idea which direction led to safety. He could continue searching for the trail, burning energy and potentially moving further from help. Or he could stay where he was and wait. He stayed. For 9 days, Mitchell Crawford sat beneath that overhang. He rationed his water down to sips. When his food ran out, he ate nothing. He found a small seep where moisture collected on the rock and licked the stone for drops of water. He marked the ground around his position with arrows made from rocks, hoping that if anyone searched the area, they would see signs of human activity. He blew his emergency whistle in patterns of 3, the universal distress signal, for 10 minutes every hour during daylight. On day 9, a rescue helicopter spotted the rock arrows. The pilot circled and saw Mitchell waving from beneath the overhang. He was airlifted to a hospital in St. George, suffering from severe dehydration and malnutrition. He had lost 42 pounds. He had not moved more than 100 feet from his overhang in over a week. Mitchell Crawford survived because he made one correct decision. He stopped moving. But why did he take that deer path in the first place? There are several theories. The most likely explanation is simple fatigue combined with optimism bias. After completing a challenging ascent, the human brain looks for shortcuts. The descent feels like it should be easier, and any path that appears to offer a more direct route becomes psychologically attractive. Mitchell saw what he wanted to see, a faster way down. Another theory suggests that Mitchell may have seen other footprints on the deer path and assumed that other hikers had successfully used this route. Game trails in popular areas often show signs of human passage, people who explored briefly before turning back. But those footprints do not tell you whether anyone actually completed the route successfully. A third possibility is that Mitchell simply misjudged the terrain. From his vantage point, the deer path appeared to connect to visible terrain below. He could not see the cliff that blocked the way. He made a reasonable assessment based on incomplete information, and that assessment was wrong. Search and rescue personnel who worked Mitchell's case told me that this pattern is extremely common. People leave established trails because the alternative looks easier, faster, or more interesting. They do not realize that game trails follow the logic of animals, not humans. A deer can navigate a 20-foot cliff. A human cannot. The most important lesson from Mitchell's case is not that he took the shortcut. That was a mistake, but a recoverable one. The critical lesson is what he did after he became lost. He stopped. Most people do not stop. Most people keep moving, convinced that they can find their way out if they just walk a little further. This instinct is almost always wrong. So how do you avoid making the same mistake? The first and most important rule is to stay on marked trails. This sounds obvious, but it requires discipline that most people underestimate. When you are tired, when the official route seems unnecessarily long, when you can see what looks like a better option, your brain will generate convincing reasons to leave the trail. You must override those reasons. Before you take any apparent shortcut, ask yourself 3 questions. First, is this path marked with official trail markers, cairns, or signage? If not, it is probably not a trail. Second, can you see the entire route from where you stand? If parts of the path disappear from view, you cannot know what obstacles lie ahead. Third, could you find your way back to this exact spot if the shortcut does not work out? If the answer is no, do not take the shortcut. Game trails have distinctive characteristics that distinguish them from human trails. They are typically narrower, often only a foot wide, compared to the 2 or 3 feet of maintained trails. They tend to follow the contour of the land rather than cutting across it, because animals prefer the path of least resistance. They frequently dead-end at water sources, feeding areas, or terrain features that matter to animals, but not to humans. Learn to recognize these differences. If you realize you have left the trail and cannot immediately find your way back, stop. Do not continue hoping that the path will eventually lead somewhere useful. Mark your location with something visible, a piece of clothing, a stack of rocks, anything that will help you find this spot again. Then make a systematic effort to locate the trail, moving in a deliberate pattern rather than wandering randomly. If you cannot find the trail within 30 minutes, return to your marked location and stay there. But what if you are already lost? What if you have been wandering for hours and have no idea where the trail is? If you are lost and cannot find your way back to the trail, the single most important thing you can do is stop moving. This contradicts every instinct you have. Your brain will scream at you to keep searching, to climb that ridge for a better view, to follow that drainage because it might lead somewhere. Ignore these impulses. Every step you take in an unknown direction is a step that makes your situation worse. Find the best shelter available. This does not need to be elaborate. A rock overhang, a thick stand of trees, even the shaded side of a boulder will work. You are looking for protection from sun, wind, and precipitation. Settle in. Make yourself as comfortable as possible. Make yourself visible. If you are in a canyon or dense forest, this may be difficult, but do what you can. If you have brightly colored clothing, spread it out where it can be seen from above. Create ground markers using rocks, branches, or anything that contrasts with the surrounding terrain. These markers serve 2 purposes. They make you visible to aerial searchers, and they indicate that a human is present, which distinguishes your location from the thousands of natural features searchers must examine. Signal actively. If you have a whistle, blow it in patterns of 3, the universal distress signal. Do this for several minutes every hour during daylight. If you have a mirror or any reflective surface, flash it toward any aircraft you see or hear. If you can safely build a fire, do so, and add green vegetation to create smoke. At night, a fire serves as both a signal and a source of warmth. Ration your resources, but do not hoard them to the point of harming yourself. If you have water, drink it. Dehydration impairs judgment and physical function, making your situation worse. If you have food, eat it. You can survive weeks without food, but you cannot function well without it. Most importantly, wait. Search and rescue operations begin from your last known location and expand outward. If you stay in one place, searchers will eventually reach you. If you keep moving, you are constantly relocating to areas that have not yet been searched, or that searchers have already cleared. The math is simple. Staying put maximizes your chances of being found. Moving minimizes them. Mitchell Crawford was lost for 9 days, but he was found because he stayed in one place. If he had kept walking, he might never have been found at all. The second case concerns water, not having enough of it, and what that lack will make you do. Karen Mitchell was 29 years old, a fitness instructor from Phoenix who had grown up hiking in the Arizona desert. She understood heat. She understood the importance of hydration. She had completed dozens of hikes in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees without incident. On July 7, 2021, Karen drove to Joshua Tree National Park in California for a solo day hike on the Boy Scout Trail, an 8-mile loop through the park's high desert terrain. She arrived at the trailhead at 7 in the morning, planning to complete the hike before the worst of the afternoon heat. She carried 2 liters of water. For an 8-mile hike in the early morning, this should have been adequate. It was not. Karen encountered problems almost immediately. The trail was more exposed than she expected. The morning temperatures climbed faster than she had anticipated. By 9:30, 2.5 hours into her hike, she had consumed all of her water. She was approximately 5 miles from her car. At this point, Karen had options. She could turn around and return the way she came. This would mean backtracking approximately 3 miles to the trailhead, a manageable distance even without water if she moved quickly and stayed calm. She could continue forward, completing the loop, which would cover another 5 miles. Or she could leave the trail entirely and search for water elsewhere. Karen chose the third option. She could see vegetation in a canyon below the trail. Green plants in the desert usually indicate moisture. She had learned this from years of desert hiking. Where there was green, there was often a spring or a seep, or at least some residual water in the soil. She left the marked trail and descended into the canyon. The green vegetation was mesquite and creosote, plants that survive in the desert by sending roots deep into the earth, sometimes 30 or 40 feet down. They access moisture that no human could ever reach. The green Karen saw was not a sign of accessible water. It was a sign of plants specifically adapted to survive where there was no accessible water. She did not know this. She searched the canyon for more than an hour, moving further from the trail, burning energy and losing moisture to sweat in the intensifying heat. By 11 in the morning, with the temperature approaching 104 degrees, Karen was in serious trouble. She was found 6 days later by a search team working the remote canyons south of the Boy Scout Trail. She had traveled approximately 2 miles from where she left the marked path. The medical examiner determined that she had died of hyperthermia and dehydration, probably within 12 to 18 hours of leaving the trail. She was 3 miles from her car when she made the decision to search for water. Her car contained a cooler with ice, 6 bottles of water, and sports drinks. If she had turned around and walked back toward the trailhead, she would have reached it in approximately 2 hours. She would have been dehydrated and uncomfortable, but she would have been alive. Instead, she walked into the desert, looking for something the desert does not provide. Why did she make this choice? The psychology of Karen's decision is tragically understandable. When your water runs out and you are still miles from safety, panic begins to set in. The brain starts generating solutions, and one of the most compelling solutions is to find more water. This feels like problem solving. This feels like taking action. This feels like the kind of resourceful thinking that survival requires. But it is almost always the wrong choice. Search and rescue professionals call this the resource fixation error. People become so focused on finding a particular resource, water, shelter, a signal, that they lose sight of the larger strategic picture. Karen was not primarily facing a water problem. She was facing a distance problem. She needed to close the gap between herself and her car as quickly as possible. Searching for water increased that gap while burning the very resource, hydration, that she needed to conserve. There is another theory about Karen's case that is darker, but possibly accurate. By 9:30 in the morning, Karen may already have been experiencing mild heat exhaustion. One of the symptoms of heat exhaustion is impaired judgment. She may have literally been incapable of making a rational decision by the time she left the trail. Her brain, affected by rising core temperature and dehydration, may have presented the search for water as not just reasonable, but essential. This is why preparation matters so much. By the time you are in the crisis, your ability to think clearly may already be compromised. The decisions that save your life need to be made before the crisis begins, when your judgment is still intact. Some have suggested that Karen was a victim of a common misconception about desert water. Many survival guides, particularly older ones, teach that green vegetation indicates water. This is true in some environments, but it is dangerously misleading in the American deserts. Desert plants have evolved specifically to survive without accessible surface water. Their green color indicates nothing about water availability for humans. Karen may have been applying knowledge that was accurate for other environments, but deadly wrong for the high desert. So what should you do differently? The first rule of desert hiking is to carry more water than you think you need. The standard calculation is 1 liter per hour of hiking, but this assumes moderate temperatures and reasonable exertion. In hot conditions, you may need twice that amount. For an 8-mile hike in the desert, even in early morning, you should carry at least 4 liters. If you cannot carry that much, your hike is too long for the conditions. The second rule is to know your turnaround point. Before you start hiking, calculate the point at which you must turn around, regardless of how far you have gone. This calculation should be based on water consumption, not distance. If you have 4 liters and you are drinking 1 liter per hour, your turnaround point is when you have consumed 2 liters, because you need the remaining 2 liters to get back. Karen consumed all of her water by the time she was 5 miles into an 8-mile loop. This means her turnaround point should have been much earlier, probably around mile 2 or 3, when she had consumed half her supply. By the time she realized she was out of water, she had already passed the point where turning around was clearly the better option. The third rule is that your vehicle is your survival station. In the desert, your car contains everything you need to survive. It provides shade. It provides a reservoir of supplies. It provides visibility for searchers. It provides the ability to signal with lights or horn. When you are in trouble in the desert, your objective is always to return to your vehicle, not to find water, not to continue to your destination. Return to your vehicle. Never leave a marked trail in the desert to search for water. This rule admits no exceptions. The water you are looking for almost certainly does not exist in any accessible form. Even if it does exist, you probably cannot find it. Even if you find it, the energy and time you spent searching will have cost you more than the water is worth. Stay on the trail. Go back to your car. If you are in the desert and you have run out of water, you are in a life-threatening emergency. Your decisions in the next few hours will determine whether you live or die. First, get out of the sun immediately. Find shade and stay in it. Direct sunlight can add 15 to 20 degrees to the effective temperature your body is experiencing. In 100-degree heat, standing in full sun is equivalent to being in 115 or 120-degree heat. Shade is not optional. It is essential. Second, stop all unnecessary movement. Every step you take generates heat and uses water. Sit down. Stay down. Do not walk around looking for better shade or a more comfortable position. Find the best available shade and stay there. Third, calculate your options honestly. How far is your vehicle? How long would it take you to reach it? Is there a closer destination, a ranger station, a campground, a road where you might flag down a passing car? If you must move, choose the shortest path to safety, even if it means backtracking. Fourth, if you must move, Do so at night. Desert temperatures can drop 30 or 40 degrees after sunset. Walking at night dramatically reduces water loss through sweating. Yes, navigation is more difficult in darkness. Yes, there are hazards you cannot see. But the reduction in water loss usually outweighs these risks. If you are severely dehydrated and must cover distance, wait for nightfall. Fifth, if you cannot reach safety, make yourself visible and wait for rescue. Use anything you have to create signals. A mirror flashing in the sun can be seen from miles away. Bright clothing spread on the ground can be spotted by aircraft. If you can safely create fire, the smoke will be visible for long distances. Karen Mitchell was 3 miles from her car. At a slow walking pace, she could have reached it in 2 hours. Even without water, she probably would have survived that walk, though she would have been seriously dehydrated by the time she arrived. Instead, she walked 2 miles in the opposite direction and died. Your car is your survival. The trail is your lifeline. Never abandon either in search of resources the desert does not provide. The third case involves a piece of technology that most hikers carry, but few truly understand. A tool that could save your life, or could kill you, depending on how you use it. Derek Sullivan was 41 years old, a weekend hiker from Atlanta, who had been exploring the trails of the Great Smoky Mountains since his college years. On September 3, 2023, he set out for a day hike on the Alum Cave Trail, a popular route that climbs to the summit of Mount LeConte. He parked at the trailhead at 8 in the morning, signed the trail register, and began his ascent. Approximately 3 miles into the hike, Derek took a wrong turn. The Alum Cave Trail intersects with several other paths in the high country, and Derek, unfamiliar with this particular section, followed a spur trail that led away from the main route. By the time he realized his error, he was deep in unfamiliar terrain with no clear sense of how to return. He pulled out his phone to check his location. The map application showed his position, but without cell service, he could not access any routing information. He could see where he was, but not how to get where he needed to be. His battery was at 14%. Derek made a decision that seemed logical at the time. He began walking, hoping to find cell service so he could call for help or access better navigation tools. He climbed to higher ground, checked his phone. No service. He walked to another ridge, checked again. Still nothing. He descended into a valley, thinking that sometimes cellular signals bounce in unexpected ways. Nothing. Each time he checked his phone, the battery dropped. 14% became 11, then 8, then 5. By 3 in the afternoon, after hours of searching for a signal that did not exist, his phone showed 2%. Derek had 1 call left. He dialed 911. The call connected. He heard a dispatcher's voice asking for his emergency. He tried to explain that he was lost in the Smokies, somewhere near Mount LeConte, but before he could provide details, the call dropped. His phone was dead. The dispatcher had received the call. They had a rough location based on the cell tower that briefly carried the signal, but Derek had been walking for hours since he became lost. He was now miles from where the ping placed him, and the coordinates were only accurate to within several square miles. Search teams were deployed immediately, but they were searching the wrong area. Derek, meanwhile, continued to walk. He figured that if he could not call for help, he would have to help himself. He walked through the night, using moonlight to navigate. He walked through the following day. He walked until he physically could not walk anymore. He was found 12 days later by a hiker who had strayed from a trail approximately 3 miles from where Derek's body lay. The medical examiner determined that he had died of exposure, probably a week before he was discovered. He had traveled approximately 6 miles from where he had been when he made that final phone call. If he had stayed where he made the call, search teams would have found him within 48 hours. What went wrong? Derek's case illustrates one of the most common and deadly misunderstandings about smartphones in the wilderness. People treat their phones as navigation devices first and communication devices second. This is backwards. In an emergency, your phone's value is not in its maps or GPS. Its value is in its ability to connect you to people who can help. Derek spent hours walking around, searching for a cell signal. During this time, he drained his battery from 14% to 2%, a loss of 12 percentage points that represented the difference between a successful rescue call and a truncated one. If he had called immediately at 14%, he would have had enough power to complete the call, provide details about his situation, and possibly even stay on the line while dispatchers coordinated a response. There is evidence that Derek may have been operating under another misconception. He may have believed that he needed a strong signal to place an emergency call. This is not true. The 911 system is designed to prioritize emergency calls. A signal that is too weak for a regular call will often carry a 911 call successfully. Derek may have been searching for signal strength that was unnecessary for the call he needed to make. Another theory involves the psychological impact of the phone itself. Derek had a device in his pocket that under normal circumstances could tell him exactly where he was and how to get anywhere he wanted to go. This may have made it psychologically difficult to accept that he was truly lost. As long as the phone had battery, there was hope. He kept checking, kept searching for signal, because the phone represented the possibility of solving his problem himself. When the phone died, that hope died with it, and he may have entered a state of despair that compromised his subsequent decisions. Search and rescue professionals note that Derek made a classic error after his call failed. He continued walking. The dispatcher had logged his approximate location based on the cell tower ping. If Derek had stayed within a few hundred yards of where he made the call, searchers would have found him. Instead, he traveled 6 miles, putting himself in an area that searchers did not reach for more than a week. Here is what you need to understand about phones in the wilderness. Your phone is a communication device, not primarily a navigation device. In an emergency, its most important function is connecting you to help. Everything else is secondary. If you are in trouble and your battery is low, call immediately. Do not search for better signal. Do not try to improve your position first. Do not take photographs of landmarks to help you describe your location later. Call 911 right now from wherever you are standing with whatever battery you have remaining. When you make that call, be prepared to communicate essential information quickly. Your name, your general location, the park you are in, the trail you were on, any landmarks you can identify, the nature of your emergency. After you have communicated this information, stay on the line as long as possible. The longer the call lasts, the more accurately dispatchers can pinpoint your location. After the call, put your phone in airplane mode. This dramatically reduces battery consumption because the phone stops constantly searching for cell signals. A phone in airplane mode can maintain battery for days instead of hours. You may need that remaining battery for a follow-up call or for searchers to ping your location. Then, stay exactly where you are. The dispatcher has logged the location of your call. Search teams will start from that point and work outward. Every step you take away from that point makes their job harder. Your instinct will be to keep moving, to help yourself, to do something. Override that instinct. Sit down. Wait. For situations where you have more battery, consider downloading offline maps before your trip. Many navigation applications allow you to pre-download maps for areas where you expect to be. These maps work without cell service. They can show you your GPS position and help you navigate back to trails or roads. This is genuinely useful. But remember that it is secondary to the phone's primary emergency function. Do not drain your battery using navigation apps when you might need that battery to call for help. If your phone is dead and you are lost, you are in a difficult situation, but not a hopeless one. You need to make yourself findable. First, stop moving. By now you should recognize this as the fundamental rule of being lost. Moving makes you harder to find. Staying put makes you easier to find. If you called 911 before your phone died, searchers have an approximate location for you. Stay near that location. Second, make yourself visible. If you have bright-colored clothing or equipment, display it prominently. Create ground markers that can be seen from the air. If you are in dense forest, Try to move to the nearest clearing or opening where you can be spotted. Third, signal actively. If you have a whistle, use it. 3 short blasts is the universal distress signal. Blow it for several minutes every hour during daylight. If you have a mirror or reflective surface, flash it toward any aircraft you see or hear. If you can safely build a fire, do so, especially at night when the light can be seen for miles. Fourth, prepare to wait. If you called 911, searchers know you are out there. They will find you eventually. Your job is to stay alive and stay findable until they do. Derek Sullivan walked for 6 miles after his phone died. He walked because staying still felt like giving up. He walked because movement felt like action, like he was doing something to save himself. He was wrong. Walking killed him. Staying still would have saved him. Learn from his mistake. When you are lost and cannot call for help, stop moving. Make yourself visible. Signal. Wait. The fourth case involves something that should never happen, but happens every year. People who travel together dying alone. Amanda and Colin Shepard were outdoor enthusiasts from Seattle who had been hiking together for nearly a decade. Amanda was 32. Colin was 36. They had completed hundreds of trails throughout the Pacific Northwest, including technical routes that required ropes and specialized equipment. They were not beginners. On August 19, 2021, they set out for a 3-day backpacking trip in Glacier National Park, Montana. Their route would take them through some of the most spectacular scenery in the American wilderness, over high passes with views of glaciers and alpine lakes, through valleys where grizzly bears still roamed. On the second day of their trip, while traversing a section of trail covered with wet, mossy rocks, Colin slipped. His foot went out from under him, his body twisted as he tried to catch himself, and he felt something give way in his right ankle. The pain was immediate and severe. He could not put weight on the leg. Amanda helped him to a flat spot beside the trail. She examined his ankle, which was already swelling. She gave him pain medication from their first aid kit. She made him comfortable with his back against a rock and his injured leg elevated. Then she made the decision that killed her. She told Colin she was going to hike out for help. The trailhead was approximately 6 miles away. She could cover that distance in 2 hours, maybe 3. She would reach the ranger station, report the injury, and return with rescue personnel. Colin would be fine. He had water, food, and shelter. She would be back before nightfall. Colin did not want her to go. He argued that they should stay together, that she could get lost, that help would come eventually if they just waited. Amanda dismissed his concerns. She knew this trail. She had been on it twice before. She was fast and fit and confident in her abilities. She left him at approximately 2 in the afternoon. Amanda Shepard never reached the trailhead. What happened to her remains partly unclear, but the evidence suggests the following reconstruction. Approximately 3 miles from where she left Colin, Amanda encountered a section of trail that had been altered by a recent rock slide. The path she remembered was no longer there. In its place was a field of unstable boulders and a faint track that appeared to continue in the right direction. She followed the track. It was not the right direction. By the time she realized her error, she was deep in unfamiliar terrain. We do not know exactly when she understood that she was lost. We do not know if she tried to retrace her steps immediately or continued hoping the path would lead somewhere. What we know is that she climbed to a ridge, hoping to get her bearings. But the landscape was disorienting, all similar peaks and valleys stretching in every direction. As afternoon turned to evening, Amanda began to panic. She started moving faster, hoping to cover more ground, hoping to find something familiar. She crossed a stream, climbed another ridge, descended into another valley. She was completely lost. Meanwhile, Colin waited. As the hours passed and Amanda did not return, his concern grew. By nightfall, he was convinced something had gone wrong, but he could not move. His ankle would not support him. He was exactly where she had left him, waiting for help that was not coming. He was found the following afternoon by other hikers who happened to be traveling the same trail. They reached the ranger station and reported both Colin's injury and Amanda's failure to return. A search was launched immediately. Amanda was found 8 days later. Her body was in a ravine approximately 3 miles from where Colin had been waiting, in the opposite direction from the trailhead. She had fallen, probably in the dark, probably while trying to navigate terrain she could not see. The fall had not killed her immediately, but her injuries had prevented her from climbing out of the ravine. She had died of exposure sometime in the first 2 or 3 days after leaving Colin. Colin Shepherd survived. His wife did not. Why did Amanda make this choice? Her decision to go for help was driven by love. She saw her husband injured and suffering, and she wanted to help him. She wanted to bring back people who could carry him out, who could provide medical care, who could end his ordeal as quickly as possible. Her motivation was entirely understandable, but it was wrong. There are several theories about why Amanda became lost. The most likely is that the trail conditions had changed since her previous visits. Wilderness trails are not static. They are affected by weather, erosion, rock slides, and fallen trees. A trail you hiked 2 years ago may not be the same trail today. Amanda was relying on memory, and her memory was out of date. Another theory involves stress and urgency. Amanda was not on a casual hike. She was racing to get help for her injured husband. This urgency may have caused her to move faster than was safe, to make navigation decisions without adequate consideration, to push through warning signs that she would normally have heeded. She was so focused on the goal that she did not notice when she left the path to that goal. There is also the possibility that Amanda became lost much earlier than she realized. In dense forest, it is possible to leave a trail and walk for considerable distance before recognizing the error. By the time she knew she was lost, she may have been miles from the last point where she was confident of her location. Her subsequent efforts to find the trail may have taken her even further away. The deepest tragedy of this case is that Colin did not need Amanda to go for help. He was on a popular trail during peak hiking season. If Amanda had stayed with him, other hikers would have found them within hours, just as they eventually found Colin alone. The rescue would have been straightforward. Both of them would have survived. Instead, Amanda made the choice that felt heroic, the choice to take action, to sacrifice her own comfort for her partner's benefit. That choice killed her. So what should you do instead? When someone in your group is injured, the entire group stays together. This rule admits no exceptions. It does not matter how far you are from help. It does not matter how confident you are in your navigation abilities. It does not matter how urgent the injury seems. You stay together. Here is why. When you split up, you create 2 separate problems instead of one. The injured person is now alone, unable to help themselves if their condition worsens. The person who went for help is now navigating solo, with no one to assist if they encounter problems. 2 people together have backup. 2 people separate have none. Additionally, splitting up dramatically complicates the search if something goes wrong. When searchers found Colin, they had to mount 2 separate operations, one to evacuate him, and another to find Amanda. If they had stayed together, there would have been only one operation, and it would have been over in hours instead of days. The exception some people cite is when the injured person is in immediate, life-threatening danger that can only be addressed by outside help. But consider this carefully. If the injury is that severe, what are the chances that you can get help and return in time? Usually the answer is that you cannot. Running for help rarely saves people who are dying. It mainly serves to separate you from them in their final hours. Before you go anywhere in the wilderness with another person, establish a rule. If either of us is injured, we both stay where we are. We signal for help. We wait. Say this out loud. Agree to it. Write it down if necessary. Make it a commitment that you will honor even when your emotions are screaming at you to do something. But what if your partner is already injured? What if you are standing over them right now, trying to decide what to do? If your partner is injured and cannot walk, here is what you do. First, treat the injury to the best of your ability. Immobilize broken bones. Stop bleeding. Make the person comfortable. Give them pain medication if you have it. Do everything you can to stabilize their condition. Second, Make them as comfortable and protected as possible. If weather threatens, set up a shelter over them. If you have a sleeping bag, put them in it. Ensure they have food and water within reach. The goal is to ensure they can survive for an extended period without your active assistance. Third, stay with them. Do not leave to get help unless you have no other option and the injury is imminently life-threatening. Stay together. Fourth, signal for help. If you have a satellite communicator or personal locator beacon, activate it. If you have a phone with any signal, call 911. If you have a whistle, blow it in patterns of 3 at regular intervals. If you can safely build a fire, build one and add green vegetation to create smoke. Fifth, wait. Other hikers will come. Search teams will come. Help will arrive. Your job is to keep yourself and your partner alive until it does. Amanda Shepard left her husband because she loved him and wanted to help him, but the best way to help him was to stay with him. The best way to ensure his rescue was to ensure her own survival. By leaving, she eliminated herself as a resource in his rescue, and she left him alone to cope with the psychological trauma of losing her. Stay together, always. The fifth case concerns darkness and the decisions people make when they cannot see. Stephen Patterson was 52 years old, an experienced backpacker from Salt Lake City who had been climbing the peaks of the American West since his 20s. On September 15, 2020, he set out to complete a day hike on the South Kaibab Trail in Grand Canyon National Park, descending to the Colorado River and returning via the same route. The South Kaibab Trail is notorious among experienced canyon hikers. Unlike most Grand Canyon trails, it has no water sources along its length. It is steep, exposed, and brutally demanding, especially on the return journey when hikers must climb more than 4,000 feet back to the rim. Most guidebooks recommend against completing the round trip in a single day, unless you are in exceptional physical condition, and start before dawn. Stephen started at 7 in the morning, reached the river by noon, and began his return ascent around 1 in the afternoon. He was carrying adequate water. He was in good physical condition. His pace was steady and his spirits were high. But the climb took longer than he expected. The afternoon heat was intense. The switchbacks seemed endless. By 5 in the afternoon, he was still 2 miles from the rim with the sun beginning to set. By 6:30, it was dark. Stephen had a headlamp, a small LED device that threw a beam perhaps 20 feet ahead. He continued climbing, using the lamp to illuminate the trail immediately in front of him. At approximately 7:15, his headlamp died. The batteries, which he had not checked before the hike, had been nearly exhausted. Stephen was now climbing one of the most dangerous trails in the American Southwest in complete darkness. There was no moon. The canyon walls blocked most of the starlight. He could see nothing except the vague outline of the trail beneath his feet. He had 2 choices. He could stop where he was, wait for dawn, and complete the climb in daylight. Or he could continue, trusting his sense of the trail to guide him the remaining distance. Stephen chose to continue. The trail at this elevation, approximately a mile from the rim, consists of narrow switchbacks carved into the canyon wall. The drop on the outside edge varies from 20 feet to several hundred feet. In daylight, the exposure is manageable. In darkness, it is terrifying and deadly. Stephen's body was found approximately 800 feet below the trail, on a ledge that had arrested his fall. The medical examiner determined that he had died on impact. His time of death was estimated at approximately 7:30 in the evening, roughly 15 minutes after his headlamp failed. He was less than a mile from the rim, less than an hour of hiking in daylight, less than 400 vertical feet from safety. He could not see the trail, so he walked off it. The fall probably lasted less than 2 seconds. Then it was over. Why did he keep walking? Stephen's case is an almost perfect example of what psychologists call the completion drive. He was so close to his goal that stopping felt impossible. The rim was right there. He had already completed the hardest part of the hike. Just a little more effort, and he would be done. This psychological state is extremely dangerous because it overrides rational risk assessment. Stephen knew that hiking in the dark without a light was dangerous. If you had asked him in the abstract, he would have told you that stopping and waiting for dawn was the obvious right choice. But in the moment, with the rim so close, with the promise of his car and a hot shower and a bed just minutes away, stopping felt like surrender. There are theories that Stephen may have initially intended to stop. Perhaps he sat down when his headlamp died, intending to wait for dawn. But as the darkness settled in and the temperature began to drop, the discomfort of staying put may have overwhelmed his better judgment. Moving toward the rim was moving toward warmth, toward comfort, toward an end to his ordeal. Staying put meant hours of cold and uncertainty. Another possibility is that Stephen simply did not realize how dangerous the situation was. He had been hiking this trail all day. He knew the general character of the terrain. He may have believed that he could navigate by feel, stepping carefully, moving slowly, working his way up the switchbacks without being able to see them. This was wrong, but it was a mistake that required experience to understand. The trail's narrowness, the severity of the exposure, the impossibility of detecting edges in the dark. These things are not obvious until you experience them. Some search and rescue professionals suggest that Stephen may have fallen almost immediately after deciding to continue. The transition from having light to having no light is disorienting. Your eyes do not instantly adapt. For the first few minutes, you are essentially blind. Stephen may have started walking before his vision adjusted, stepped off the trail within his first few paces, and fallen before he even understood what was happening. Here is what you need to understand about darkness in the wilderness. Darkness is not an inconvenience. It is a survival condition. When you cannot see where you are going, you should not go there. The first rule is to plan your hike so that you complete it well before dark. For any wilderness trip, estimate how long the route will take. Then add a buffer of at least 2 hours. If the math suggests you will be hiking after sunset, shorten your route or start earlier. The second rule is to carry multiple light sources with fresh batteries. A headlamp is essential for any hike that might extend into evening hours. A backup flashlight provides redundancy. Spare batteries for both ensure that you are never caught in darkness without options. Check your batteries before every trip. The 5 minutes this takes is trivial compared to the consequences of a dead light. The third rule is to set a hard turnaround time based on daylight, not distance. Calculate how many hours of light you have. Calculate how long the return journey will take. Set a turnaround time that ensures you complete the return before sunset. Honor that time, regardless of how close you are to your destination. Stephen should have turned around no later than 3 in the afternoon. At that point, he still had several hours of daylight for the climb. He would have reached the rim before dark with time to spare. Instead, he pushed on, consumed the remaining daylight, and found himself in darkness without a working light. If you find yourself hiking as darkness falls, stop immediately. Do not tell yourself that you can make it if you just move faster. Do not push on hoping that the trail will become easier. Stop. Find the safest spot available. Prepare to spend the night. But what if you are already on a trail in complete darkness without a working light? Here is what you do. First, stop moving immediately. Do not take another step. You cannot see the terrain. You cannot see the trail edge. You cannot see the hazards. Every step is a gamble, and the stakes are your life. Second, get into the safest position available. If you are on an exposed trail with drop-offs, move to the inside edge, against the wall or hillside. If you can feel solid rock beneath you, sit down on that rock. Make yourself as stable as possible. Third, prepare to spend the night. This will be uncomfortable. It may be cold. You will be bored and frustrated and perhaps frightened. None of these things will kill you. A fall in the darkness will kill you. Accept the discomfort as the price of survival. Fourth, stay warm. If you have extra clothing, put it on. If you have an emergency blanket, use it. Draw your knees to your chest and wrap your arms around them to conserve heat. If you have a pack, Put your feet inside it for insulation. Do everything you can to minimize heat loss. 5th, stay hydrated and eat if you have food. Your body burns calories to stay warm. Give it fuel to work with. 6th, wait for dawn. The night will end. When it does, you will be able to see. You will be able to complete your hike safely. A few hours of discomfort is an acceptable price for surviving until morning. Stephen Patterson was less than a mile from safety. He chose 15 more minutes of walking over 8 hours of waiting. That choice killed him. The trail will be there at dawn. You might not be. Choose to wait. The 6th case challenges one of the most persistent myths in wilderness survival: the idea that following water downstream will lead you to safety. Rachel Warren was 26 years old, recently graduated from college in Oregon, eager to prove herself capable of independent wilderness travel. On June 8, 2022, she set out for her first solo backpacking trip in Olympic National Park, Washington. She had chosen a relatively easy route, a loop through the temperate rainforest that would take 3 days to complete. On the second day, Rachel missed a trail junction. The rainforest is dense, the trails often obscured by fallen logs and thick vegetation, and the signage at this particular junction had been damaged by a winter storm and not yet replaced. She walked for approximately 2 hours before she realized something was wrong. The trail she was following did not match her map. The landmarks she expected to see were absent. She was lost. Rachel had read survival guides. She had watched videos. She knew, or thought she knew, the rule that everyone seems to know. When you are lost in the wilderness, find a stream and follow it downstream. Water flows to civilization. Rivers lead to roads. Follow the water, and you will find people. She found a stream. The stream was small, barely more than a trickle, emerging from beneath a moss-covered log and winding down through the forest. Rachel began to follow it. For the first hour, progress was manageable. The stream bed provided a clear path through the otherwise impenetrable vegetation. Rachel convinced herself that this was working. She was making forward progress. The stream would lead her somewhere. The stream led her into a canyon. As the terrain descended, the walls on either side grew steeper. The stream became a series of small waterfalls, each requiring careful climbing to descend. The vegetation closed in, thick ferns and devil's club that tore at her skin and clothing. By late afternoon, Rachel was in a gorge, perhaps 30 feet deep, with vertical walls she could not climb. The stream continued downward, dropping over a waterfall she could not see the bottom of. She could not go forward. She tried to go back, but the slopes she had descended were too steep and slippery to climb. She was trapped. Rachel Warren died in that gorge. Her body was found 11 days later by a search and rescue team that had exhausted all other options and begun searching the most inaccessible terrain in the area. She was less than a mile from the trail she had lost, in a location so difficult to reach that rescuers had to use technical climbing equipment to recover her remains. What led her into this trap? Rachel's case is a tragedy born of misinformation. The advice to follow water downstream is one of the most persistent and dangerous myths in survival lore. It sounds logical. Water does flow downhill. Rivers do eventually reach civilization. In certain terrains, following water can actually work. But in mountainous terrain, following water is one of the most dangerous things you can do. The physics are simple. Water flows downhill by the path of least resistance. In the mountains, that path often involves cliffs, waterfalls, and narrow gorges. The water can navigate these obstacles because water does not need to climb, jump, or use ropes. A human being cannot navigate them. The water leads you into terrain that traps and kills you. Rachel was probably dead within 36 hours of entering that gorge. The walls were too steep to climb. The stream below was too powerful to swim. She had no way to signal from the bottom of a forested canyon. She was invisible from the air, inaudible from any traveled route. She simply sat in that gorge and waited to die. The search teams did not find her for 11 days because the gorge was not near any trail, any viewpoint. any place that people would normally go. It was a geological feature on a map, not a destination. The only reason anyone was there was because searchers had systematically eliminated every other possibility and were now searching terrain that no rational person would ever enter. Some have speculated that Rachel may have recognized her mistake before it was too late. Perhaps she stopped at the top of one of those waterfalls, looked at the drop below, and considered turning back. Perhaps she descended anyway because she had already come so far and did not want to waste the effort. Perhaps she believed the gorge would open up again if she just got past this one obstacle. This is the insidiousness of the trap. Each step deeper seems justifiable because you have already invested so much in getting there. The sunk cost fallacy combines with the follow the water myth to create a psychological gravity that pulls you downward, even as the terrain makes escape increasingly impossible. So what should you do instead? Forget everything you have heard about following water downstream. In mountainous terrain, this advice will get you killed. Water leads to canyons, cliffs, waterfalls, and terrain that is impassable for humans. The correct approach is almost exactly the opposite. When you are lost in mountainous terrain, go up, not down. Seek ridges, not drainages. Here is why. From a ridge, you can see. You can identify landmarks. You can spot trails, roads, buildings, anything that might indicate the presence of humans. You can be seen by searchers, whether in helicopters or on the ground. Ridges are exposed, visible, findable. From a canyon or drainage, you can see nothing but the walls around you. You cannot be seen from above because the vegetation and terrain obscure you. You cannot be found because searchers have no reason to look in a place no human would deliberately go. Additionally, travel along ridges is usually easier than travel along drainages. Ridges tend to follow consistent gradients with fewer obstacles. Drainages are choked with fallen trees, boulders, waterfalls, and thick vegetation. Even if a drainage eventually led to safety, the difficulty of the travel would exhaust you long before you got there. If you are lost, climb to the nearest ridge. Find a clearing or an open area where you can be seen. Stay there. Signal. Wait. But what if you have already followed a stream into a canyon and find yourself trapped? Here is what you do. First, stop descending immediately. Do not try to go just a little further to see if the canyon opens up. It will not open up. Every step downward is a step closer to a trap you cannot escape. Second, assess whether you can climb back out. This is often harder than it seems because slopes that were easy to descend may be impossible to climb. Test the terrain carefully before committing to an upward route. If you cannot climb out safely, do not attempt it. Third, if you are truly trapped, make yourself as visible and audible as possible. If the canyon has any opening to the sky, mark your position with bright-colored objects. If you have a whistle, blow it constantly. Sound can travel strangely in canyons, and your whistle may be heard by someone even if you cannot hear them. Fourth, prepare for an extended wait. You may be in a location that searchers will not reach for days or weeks. Ration your food and water. Find the most protected spot available. Do everything you can to stay alive as long as possible. Fifth, if there is any possibility of escape, take it, but only if the attempt does not make your situation worse. A failed climb can result in injury that makes your situation more desperate. Be conservative. Accept that waiting for rescue may be your best option. Rachel Warren followed the water because she believed it would lead her to safety. It led her to her death. The same water that sustains life can deliver you into terrain from which there is no escape. Go up, not down. Seek ridges, not drainages. Do not follow the water. I have covered 6 cases now. Each one contains a specific lesson, a piece of knowledge that could mean the difference between survival and death. But I have more cases to share, more lessons to teach. The patterns are clear. The same mistakes happen again and again. People leave trails. People split up. People push through warnings. People keep moving when they should stop. You can learn from these mistakes without making them yourself. That is the purpose of this video. That is why I am telling you these stories. Pay attention. The next case might save your life. The 7th case involves weather and the false belief that you can outrun what you can see coming. Paul Kirchner was 44 years old, a seasoned mountaineer who had summited peaks across the western United States. On August 2nd, 2023, he set out to climb Long's Peak in Rocky Mountain National Park, one of Colorado's most challenging 14ers, and a mountain he had climbed successfully twice before. Paul started early, leaving the trailhead at 3 in the morning to take advantage of the cool darkness for the lower portion of the climb. By 9 in the morning, he had reached the boulder field at approximately 12,700 feet and was preparing for the final push to the 14,259-foot summit. The weather forecast had mentioned afternoon thunderstorms. This is standard for Colorado in summer. Almost every day brings a chance of afternoon convection, storms that build rapidly in the heating atmosphere and drop lightning on the peaks with little warning. The standard protocol is to summit early and descend before the storms arrive. Paul was running behind schedule. The climb had taken longer than expected, and it was now approaching 10 in the morning. Looking west, he could see clouds beginning to form over the distant ranges. They were not threatening yet. They were just clouds. The same clouds he had seen every other time he climbed in Colorado in summer. He estimated he was about 90 minutes from the summit. If he pushed hard, he could reach the top by 11:30, spend 15 minutes enjoying the view, and begin his descent before noon. The storms usually did not arrive until 2 or 3 in the afternoon. He had time. Not a lot of time, but enough. He continued climbing. By 11, the clouds were building faster than expected. By 11:30, they were towering cumulus formations with dark undersides that signaled instability and imminent precipitation. Paul was still 30 minutes from the summit. He kept climbing. At approximately 11:45, as Paul was traversing an exposed section of ridge approximately 300 feet below the summit, the storm arrived. There was no gradual transition, no warning drops of rain, no distant thunder growing closer. One moment he was climbing in sunshine. The next, he was in a whiteout of sleet and howling wind. And then, the lightning began. On a mountain, lightning does not strike from the sky and hit the ground. It strikes from the clouds and flows through any elevated point. A person standing on an exposed ridge becomes a pathway for electrical current, seeking the easiest route to Earth. Paul never had a chance. A climber descending from a different route found his body approximately 2 hours later, lying on the ridge where he had been struck. The medical examiner's report concluded that death had been instantaneous. Why did Paul keep climbing when he could see the storm building? He knew better. That is the most tragic aspect of this case. He had climbed 14ers before. He understood the afternoon thunderstorm pattern. He knew the protocol. Summit by noon, descend immediately. But he was so close. 300 feet from the summit, 30 minutes of climbing, after hours of effort and years of anticipation. The summit was right there. He could almost touch it. This is summit fever, and it kills experienced mountaineers every year. The psychological attachment to the goal becomes so strong that it overrides rational risk assessment. The person sees the warning signs, understands them intellectually, and continues anyway, because stopping feels impossible. There are several theories about why Paul did not turn around when the clouds began building at 10 in the morning. One theory is optimism bias. Paul had seen clouds build before and dissipate without producing storms. Maybe this would be one of those days. Maybe the weather would hold long enough for him to reach the summit and begin his descent. He was gambling, playing the odds, hoping that this time would be different. Another theory involves the sunk cost fallacy. Paul had already invested hours of climbing. He had gotten up at 2 in the morning. He had driven to the trailhead in darkness. He had carried his pack up thousands of feet of elevation. All of that investment would be wasted if he turned around now. The summit was so close. Just a little more effort, and the investment would pay off. A third theory suggests that Paul may have genuinely misjudged the speed at which the storm was developing. Colorado thunderstorms can build from scattered clouds to violent electrical storms in less than an hour. If Paul expected the storm to arrive around 2 in the afternoon, as they typically do, he may have believed he had several hours of buffer time. The storm arrived 3 hours ahead of his expectation. Whatever the reason, Paul continued climbing when he should have retreated. He prioritized the summit over his survival. He made a calculation that seemed reasonable to him in the moment, and that calculation was fatally wrong. Here is what you need to understand about weather in the mountains. The rule for mountain weather is absolute. When you see conditions deteriorating, your climb is over. Not when the storm arrives. Not when you hear thunder. When you see clouds building. That is your signal to turn around. Clouds building means instability in the atmosphere. Instability means the potential for rapid storm development. You cannot predict how fast a storm will arrive, or how severe it will be. You can only respond to the warning signs by removing yourself from danger. The second rule is to set a hard turnaround time before you begin and honor it absolutely. For 14ers in Colorado, the standard turnaround time is noon at the latest. If you are not on the summit by noon, you turn around, regardless of how close you are. This rule exists because it removes the decision from the moment. You do not have to assess conditions or weigh probabilities. You simply obey the clock. Paul should have set a turnaround time of 11 in the morning. At 11, he should have assessed his position and realized he could not make the summit by noon. He should have turned around immediately. If he had done this, he would have been off the exposed ridge and descending toward tree line when the storm hit. He would have been uncomfortable and possibly frightened, but he would have been alive. The third rule is that the summit is never worth dying for. This sounds obvious when stated plainly, but it is remarkably difficult to honor in practice. When you are close to a goal you have worked hard to achieve, stopping feels like failure. It feels like weakness. It feels like giving up. It is not giving up. It is surviving. The mountain will be there tomorrow. You can come back when conditions are better. You can reach the summit on a day when the weather cooperates, but only if you are alive to make that attempt. But what if the storm catches you anyway? What if you are on an exposed ridge when lightning begins? Here is what you do. First, descend immediately. Get off the ridge, away from the summit, toward lower ground. Do this as quickly as you can without falling. Second, avoid isolated features. Lightning tends to strike the tallest objects. Do not shelter under a lone tree. Do not stand next to a prominent boulder. Do not be the tallest thing in your immediate area. Third, if you cannot reach safety, assume the lightning position. This is a crouch on the balls of your feet, with your feet together, your body low, and your hands over your ears. The goal is to minimize your contact with the ground while reducing your height. If lightning strikes nearby, the current will flow through the ground. The lightning position reduces the chance that the current will flow through your body. Fourth, remove metal objects. If you are wearing a pack with a metal frame, take it off and move away from it. Metal does not attract lightning, but it does conduct electricity effectively. You do not want to be touching metal when a strike occurs. Fifth, wait for the storm to pass. Lightning storms in the mountains are usually brief but intense. If you can survive the first 30 minutes, the storm will likely move on. Stay in the lightning position until you have not seen lightning or heard thunder for at least 30 minutes. Paul Kirchner did not have time to do any of these things. The lightning struck before he could react. But if he had turned around when he first saw the clouds building, he would never have been on that ridge when the storm arrived. See the warning. Heed the warning. The summit will wait. The storm will not. The eighth case is about experience and how it becomes a liability instead of an asset. Robert Garrison was 45 years old, a career ranger who had spent 18 years working in some of the most remote wilderness areas in the American Southwest. He had participated in more than 200 search and rescue operations. He had found lost hikers, recovered bodies from inaccessible canyons, and trained countless other rangers in wilderness navigation. He was an expert by any measure. On October 14, 2016, Robert was assigned to investigate a disappearance in a remote section of Canyonlands National Park in Utah, terrain he knew intimately. A solo hiker had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier, and initial searches had found only a backpack beside a trail. Robert's task was to search more remote areas where the hiker might have wandered. He set out alone. This was his preference and his prerogative as a senior ranger. He worked better without partners. He could move faster, cover more ground, follow his instincts without having to explain his reasoning. He radioed base at 9 in the morning, reporting that he was entering the search area. He radioed again at 11, reporting that he had found some items of interest and was investigating further. He said he had found footprints leading into a drainage and was going to follow them. That was his last transmission. When Robert failed to check in at his scheduled time of 1 in the afternoon, other rangers were dispatched to his last known location. They found the items he had reported. They found his footprints leading into the drainage. They followed the footprints for approximately half a mile before the terrain became rocky and the trail disappeared. The search for Robert Garrison lasted 16 days and involved more than 200 personnel. They found his radio in a stream approximately 2 miles from where his footprints had been last seen. They found a notebook page with his handwriting, time-stamped shortly after his last transmission. The note read, "Found more evidence. Trail is clear. Following." They never found Robert Garrison. We do not know what happened to him. The investigation could not determine the cause. There was no evidence of foul play. There was no evidence of natural disaster. There was simply a man who had walked into terrain he knew intimately and had not walked out. Robert's case remains one of the most troubling disappearances in the region's history. An 18-year veteran, a search and rescue expert, a man who knew this terrain better than almost anyone alive, vanished without explanation. There are several theories about what happened. The first and most likely involves an accident that prevented him from calling for help. Robert may have fallen into a slot canyon, been trapped by a rock slide, or suffered a medical emergency that incapacitated him before he could radio for assistance. His body may be in a location so remote or concealed that searchers simply could not find it. The second theory involves the psychology of expertise. Robert was so confident in his abilities that he may have taken risks he would never have allowed a less experienced person to take. He went alone into remote terrain. He followed a trail into a drainage without backup. He may have pushed into areas that his training told him were dangerous because his training also told him that he could handle danger. This is the paradox of expertise. The more you know, the more confident you become. The more confident you become, the more risks you take. Eventually, you encounter a risk that exceeds your ability to manage it, and the confidence that served you for years becomes the thing that kills you. A third theory suggests that Robert may have found the missing hiker, or what remained of them, and in the process encountered whatever had caused that person to disappear in the first place. This is speculative, but the wilderness contains hazards that are rare and unpredictable. Flash floods, sudden rock slides, aggressive wildlife, unstable terrain. Robert may have encountered one of these hazards at exactly the wrong moment. The most disturbing theory is that there was no single event, no dramatic moment when everything went wrong. Perhaps Robert simply walked too far, became slightly disoriented, continued in a direction that seemed right but was wrong, and gradually moved deeper into terrain from which there was no return. Even experts can become lost. The wilderness does not care about your credentials. Here is what you need to understand about experience. Experience creates overconfidence. This is one of the most dangerous patterns in wilderness travel. People who have spent years in the backcountry, they often take risks that would terrify a novice, or because they believe their experience protects them. It does not. The wilderness that let you survive 1,000 trips is the same wilderness that can kill you on trip 1001. Your experience does not change the terrain, the weather, or the physics of a fall. It only changes your perception of risk, and that changed perception can lead you into situations you cannot survive. If you are an experienced wilderness traveler, here is the uncomfortable truth. You are more likely to die in the backcountry than a beginner is, not because the terrain is more dangerous for you, but because you will go into terrain that beginners would not enter. You will take risks that beginners would not take. You will push limits that beginners would not approach. The solution is deliberate humility. Regardless of how much experience you have, maintain the caution of a beginner. Question your decisions. Second-guess your assessments. Ask yourself, if a novice proposed this plan, would I consider it reasonable? Robert Garrison went alone into remote terrain because he trusted his abilities. That trust may have been justified by 18 years of successful wilderness travel, but it only takes one failure to erase a lifetime of success. Never go alone into remote areas. Always check in at scheduled times. Always tell someone exactly where you plan to go and when you plan to return. The protocols that seem unnecessary for an expert are the same protocols that save experts' lives. But what if you are already in over your head? What if you find yourself in terrain that exceeds your abilities, or in a situation that you cannot control? Here is what you do. First, stop. Do not continue hoping that things will get easier. They probably will not. Stop and assess your situation honestly. Second, retrace your route if possible. Go back to the last point where you were confident of your position. Go back to the trail. Go back to safety. Ego may tell you that retreating is failure. Ignore your ego. Retreating is surviving. Third, if you cannot retrace your route, make yourself visible and wait for help. The same advice that applies to novices applies to experts. Stop moving. Signal. Wait. Your experience may tell you that you can self-rescue. Your experience may be wrong. Sometimes the best thing an expert can do is admit that they need help. Fourth, accept that experience has limits. You do not know everything. You cannot predict everything. The wilderness can always surprise you. Approach every trip with the humility of someone who understands that nature is larger and more powerful than any individual human. Robert Garrison walked into terrain he knew intimately and never walked out. His experience did not save him. His confidence may have doomed him. Respect the wilderness, regardless of how many times you have been there before. But there are more cases, more patterns, more lessons that could save your life. The ninth case takes us to the desert and the decision to leave the one thing that might save your life. Thomas and Ellen Pruitt were 62 years old, a retired couple from Ohio who had spent their careers as high school teachers. For their 40th wedding anniversary, they planned a road trip through the American Southwest, visiting the national parks they had always dreamed of seeing. On April 12, 2023, they were driving through Death Valley National Park when they saw an intriguing notation on their map. A ghost town, approximately 15 miles from the main road, accessible by what the map indicated was a maintained dirt track. Thomas was an experienced driver. He had grown up on farms in rural Ohio and knew how to handle vehicles on unpaved roads. He turned off the pavement and began driving toward the ghost town. The dirt track deteriorated rapidly. What had seemed like a maintained road became ruts and sand and rocks. Thomas pressed on, confident in his abilities, eager to reach their destination. Approximately 8 miles from the main road, the vehicle became stuck. The sand was too deep, too soft. The wheels spun without traction. Thomas tried everything he knew, rocking the vehicle, placing their floor mats under the tires, digging with the small camping shovel they had brought. Nothing worked. It was approximately 1 in the afternoon. The temperature was 112 degrees. Thomas and Ellen assessed their situation. They had water, approximately 2 gallons between their personal bottles and the supply in their cooler. They had food. They had shade in the vehicle. They had a phone, though there was no cellular signal. They decided to walk out. The main road was 8 miles away. Thomas calculated that they could cover that distance in 3 hours, maybe 4. They would reach the pavement, flag down a passing car, and get help recovering their vehicle. They took their water bottles, approximately half a gallon each. They left the rest in the vehicle because it was too heavy to carry. They set out at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon. They were found 6 days later, approximately 4 miles from their vehicle. Their water bottles, both empty, were near their bodies. The medical examiner determined that they had died of heat stroke and dehydration, probably within 12 to 18 hours of leaving their car. The vehicle was still there, of course. The cooler still contained more than a gallon of water. The air conditioning still worked. The horn still sounded. The mirrors still reflected sunlight. Everything Thomas and Ellen needed to survive was in that vehicle. They walked away from it and died. Why did they make this choice? The Pruitts made a decision that seemed rational based on their experience of the world. In Ohio, if your car breaks down 8 miles from a main road, walking out is a reasonable option. 8 miles is a few hours of walking. You would be uncomfortable, but you would survive. Death Valley is not Ohio. At 112 degrees, the human body loses water at an astonishing rate. Under direct sun with physical exertion, you can lose more than a liter of water per hour through sweat. This water must be replaced, or you will die. Not eventually. Within hours. The Pruitts carried approximately 2 liters of water total between them. Walking 8 miles in extreme heat would take at least 4 hours. They needed approximately 4 liters each for the journey, a total of 8 liters. They had 2. The math was impossible from the beginning. They were dead the moment they decided to walk. Why did they make this decision? Probably because they did not understand the math. They knew it was hot. They knew they would need water. They did not know that the heat would drain them so quickly that their supply would be exhausted within 2 hours. There is also the psychology of action. Sitting in a stuck vehicle feels passive. It feels like waiting to die. Walking toward the road feels active. It feels like solving the problem. The Pruitts were teachers, people accustomed to taking action, to solving problems through effort and determination. Sitting still may have felt like surrender, but sitting still was the only choice that could have saved them. Here is what you need to understand about vehicles in the desert. Your vehicle is your survival station. In extreme environments, this is not a metaphor. Your vehicle provides shade, shelter, supplies, visibility, and signaling capability. It is the single most important survival asset you possess. When your vehicle becomes disabled in hostile terrain, your job is to stay with it. Do not walk out. Do not hike to the road. Do not attempt to cover the distance on foot. Stay with your vehicle and wait for rescue. Here is why this works. Your vehicle is visible. From the air, a car is obvious. From the road, a car is obvious. Even partially buried in sand or obscured by vegetation, a vehicle is far more visible than a human body. Your vehicle has supplies. Whatever water, food, and equipment you brought with you is in that vehicle. If you leave, you can only carry a fraction of those supplies. If you stay, you have access to everything. Your vehicle provides shelter. The temperature inside a shaded vehicle can be 20 or 30 degrees lower than the temperature in direct sun. If you have fuel, you can run the air conditioning. If you do not, you can create shade using the vehicle as a barrier against the sun. Your vehicle can signal. The horn can be heard from far away. The mirrors can reflect sunlight for miles. If you have fuel, you can run the lights at night. If the vehicle catches fire, the smoke will be visible for vast distances. These are signaling options you do not have on foot. The Pruitts walked away from all of these advantages because they believed they could cover 8 miles on foot. They could not. No one could. Not in those conditions. Not with that amount of water. If your vehicle becomes stuck in the desert, here is what you do. Open the hood. This is a universal distress signal. Create shade beside the vehicle, on the side, away from the sun. Sit in that shade. Drink your water when you are thirsty. Wait. Search teams will find you. Your vehicle will be reported missing when you do not return it. The rental company will track its GPS location. Rangers will search the roads. Helicopters will fly the area. You will be found, but only if you are with your vehicle. If you walk away, you become a small figure in a vast landscape. You become nearly invisible. You become unfindable. Thomas and Ellen Pruitt were 4 miles from their car when they died. If they had stayed with the vehicle, they would have been found within 48 hours. Their car was visible from the air. Their position was eventually determined by the rental company's GPS tracking. Everything that could have saved them was in that vehicle. They walked away and died. Do not make the same mistake. But what if you are already stranded in extreme heat? Here is what you do. First, get out of the sun. This is the most important immediate action. Direct sun can add 20 degrees to the effective temperature. Find shade and stay in it. If you have a vehicle, the shadow of the vehicle is your shade. If you do not have a vehicle, look for rock overhangs, dense vegetation, any structure that blocks direct sunlight. Second, minimize exertion. Every movement generates heat and uses water. Lie down, stay still. Do not walk around looking for better options. Accept the shade you have found and stay there. Third, ration your water intelligently. Do not drink it all immediately, but do not hoard it either. Dehydration impairs judgment and physical function. Drink enough to maintain cognitive clarity. If you have more water than you need for the next few hours, you can afford to drink more freely. Fourth, if you must move, do so at night. Desert temperatures can drop 30 or 40 degrees after sunset. Walking at night dramatically reduces water loss. If you must cover distance, wait for darkness. Fifth, signal constantly. If you have a mirror or reflective surface, flash it at any aircraft you see or hear. If you have anything brightly colored, display it prominently. If you can safely create fire, do so, especially at night. Sixth, understand the timeline. In extreme heat without water, you may have only 6 to 12 hours before incapacitation. Do not waste those hours on futile walks. Use them to create the best possible conditions for rescue. The Pruitts had water, shade, and a visible vehicle. They had everything they needed to survive for days. They chose to walk away from those advantages and died within hours. Your vehicle is your survival. Stay with it. The 10th case involves the most psychologically powerful force in outdoor recreation. The summit fever that makes rational people do irrational things. The party consisted of 3 experienced mountaineers: David Hoffman, 46, the leader; Jennifer Walsh, 33, a climbing instructor; Nathan Cole, 29, a physician with wilderness medicine training. Together, they had decades of experience on technical terrain. They had climbed peaks across North America. They knew the risks. They knew the protocols. On May 15, 2022, they were attempting the West Buttress route on Denali, the highest peak in North America. They had been on the mountain for 12 days, acclimatizing and waiting for a weather window. Finally, on day 13, conditions cleared. They began their summit push at 2 in the morning. The climb went well. By noon, they had reached 17,000 feet, approximately 3,000 feet below the summit. The weather remained clear. They were on schedule. At approximately 1 in the afternoon, clouds began to form to the south. At first, they were distant, not threatening. David noted them and decided to continue. They had come so far. The summit was only hours away. By 2 in the afternoon, the clouds had spread across half the sky. The wind was picking up. The temperature was dropping. Jennifer expressed concern. David acknowledged the deteriorating conditions, but argued that they could still make the summit if they pushed hard. Nathan, the physician, pointed out that they were above 17,000 feet, that their judgment might already be impaired by altitude, that the conditions they were dismissing as manageable could become deadly within hours. David overruled him. They were so close, just a few more hours. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, with the summit still more than an hour away, the storm hit. Visibility dropped to 0 within minutes. The temperature plummeted. The wind rose to speeds that made standing difficult. The 3 climbers attempted to descend. They could not find the route. The storm had erased all landmarks. Their tracks from the ascent were already buried under fresh snow. They stopped. They dug a snow cave, using the emergency technique they had practiced for exactly this situation. They huddled together, waiting for the storm to pass. The storm did not pass. It intensified through the night and continued through the following day. When conditions finally cleared, 48 hours after they had dug in, the three climbers attempted to locate their route. They could not. The storm had transformed the mountain. Nothing looked familiar. They began descending in what they believed was the correct direction. It was not. Their bodies were found 3 weeks later, approximately half a mile from high camp, in the opposite direction from safety. They had survived the initial storm. They had survived 48 hours in a snow cave. They had died trying to descend a mountain they could no longer navigate. What drove them to keep climbing when they could see the weather changing? Summit fever is not a metaphor. It is a documented psychological phenomenon that affects mountaineers, particularly at high altitude, where judgment is already impaired by reduced oxygen. The closer you get to a goal, the more difficult it becomes to abandon that goal. David and his team had invested 12 days on the mountain. They had spent thousands of dollars on equipment and logistics. They had trained for months. They had dreamed of this summit for years. When the clouds began forming at 1 in the afternoon, David was faced with a choice: turn around now, with the summit just hours away, and accept that all of that investment was lost, or continue, gambling that the weather would hold long enough to complete the climb. He chose to gamble. This is what summit fever does. It makes the gamble feel reasonable. It minimizes the risks and magnifies the rewards. It tells you that you have come too far to quit now. The team dynamic may have contributed. Jennifer expressed concern, but did not insist on turning around. Nathan raised objections, but accepted David's decision. In a group, there is often pressure to defer to the leader, especially when that leader is experienced and confident. Individual doubts get suppressed in favor of group consensus. There is also the altitude factor. At 17,000 feet, the human brain is operating on significantly reduced oxygen. Cognitive function is impaired. Judgment is compromised. Decisions that would seem obviously wrong at sea level can seem perfectly reasonable in the hypoxic environment of high altitude. David was not stupid. Under normal circumstances, he would have recognized the warning signs and turned around. But circumstances were not normal. The altitude, the investment, the proximity to the goal, all combined to create conditions in which a deadly decision felt like the right choice. So how do you fight summit fever? The solution is pre-commitment. Before you begin your climb, establish a turnaround time that you will honor absolutely, regardless of conditions, regardless of how close you are to the summit. This turnaround time should be based on safety margins, not optimistic projections. Calculate how long you need to reach the summit and return safely. Add a buffer. Set the turnaround time early enough that even if you turn around at the last moment, you will still reach safety before conditions deteriorate. Write this turnaround time down. Tell your climbing partners. Make it a commitment that cannot be renegotiated in the moment. When that time arrives, turn around. Do not discuss it. Do not debate it. Do not ask whether conditions might hold a little longer. Turn around immediately, without hesitation, without regret. David's team should have set a turnaround time of noon. At noon, they should have assessed their position. They were still 3,000 feet below the summit, with conditions beginning to deteriorate. A noon turnaround would have meant abandoning the summit attempt, but it would have meant doing so while they could still descend safely. Instead, they continued for 3.5 more hours, during which conditions deteriorated from concerning to deadly. By the time the storm hit, they were trapped on the upper mountain with no safe route down. The second element of preventing summit fever is the group veto. Any member of the party should have the authority to call for a turnaround, and that call should be honored without argument. If Jennifer or Nathan had said, "We are turning around now," and the group had honored that call, they would have survived. In practice, this requires establishing the veto before the climb begins. Everyone agrees that anyone can call for a retreat, and that call will be obeyed. This removes the social pressure to defer to the leader. It empowers individuals to act on their concerns rather than suppressing them. David overruled Nathan's concerns because there was no established veto system. Nathan raised objections, but ultimately deferred to the leader's judgment. A proper veto system would have prevented this. But what if the storm catches you anyway? What if you are trapped on a mountain in severe weather? Here is what you do. First, stop. Do not attempt to navigate in a whiteout. You cannot see hazards. You cannot find your route. You are more likely to walk off a cliff than to reach safety. Second, dig in. Build a snow cave or snow trench if conditions allow. These provide crucial protection from wind and maintain temperatures well above the ambient air temperature outside. A snow shelter can mean the difference between surviving the storm and dying from exposure. Third, wait. The storm will eventually pass. It may take hours or days, but weather systems do not last forever. Your job is to survive until conditions improve. Fourth, mark your shelter. If you have anything visible, place it outside the entrance to your shelter. This makes it easier for rescuers to spot you and easier for you to find your shelter if you need to leave it temporarily. Fifth, when conditions clear, navigate carefully. The landscape may have changed dramatically. Landmarks may be buried. Trails may be invisible. Use extreme caution and turn back immediately if you encounter anything uncertain. David's team survived the initial storm. They built a snow cave and waited 48 hours for conditions to clear. What killed them was not the storm. It was the navigation afterward. They descended in the wrong direction, probably because the storm had erased all familiar landmarks, and they became disoriented. If they had waited longer, if they had been more cautious in their descent, if they had turned back when they encountered unfamiliar terrain, they might have survived. But summit fever does not end at the summit. The same psychological forces that drove them upward drove them to push their luck on the descent. The summit is never worth your life. Neither is the descent. If you are unsure, wait. If you are disoriented, stop. The mountain will still be there. You might not be. The 11th case involves sound, and why your voice is nearly useless when you need it most. Tyler Morrison was 27 years old, a trail runner from the Bay Area who was in the best physical condition of his life. On October 3, 2021, he set out for a 30-mile training run in Yosemite National Park. Preparing for an ultramarathon, he planned to compete in the following month. The run went well for the first 25 miles. Tyler was moving smoothly, hitting his target pace, feeling strong. Then, descending a steep section of trail, approximately 5 miles from the trailhead, his leg cramped violently. He stumbled, his foot caught on a root, and he fell. The impact dislocated his knee. Tyler was now lying on a trail with an injury that prevented him from walking. He had no phone, having left it in his car to save weight. He had no signaling device, no whistle, no mirror, nothing except the clothes on his body and the small hydration pack on his back. He began to call for help. For the next 3 days, Tyler Morrison called out at regular intervals, hoping to attract the attention of other hikers. He heard voices on multiple occasions, other people on the trail, passing within what seemed like a few hundred yards of his position. He shouted. He screamed. He called for help until his voice was raw. No one came. He was found on day 4 by hikers who happened to leave the trail for a bathroom break and stumbled upon him approximately 60 yards from the main path. He had fallen into a shallow ravine that concealed him from view. His voice, carrying through the forest, had been heard by multiple people who had dismissed it as animal noise. Tyler Morrison survived, but he came within hours of not surviving. He developed hypothermia and early gangrene. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital. He was permanently affected by the experience. Why did no one come when he called for help? Tyler's case illustrates a critical truth about signaling in the wilderness. The human voice is nearly useless as a distress signal. This seems counterintuitive. We use our voices to communicate every day. We assume that if we shout, people will hear us and understand that we need help. In the wilderness, this assumption is wrong. The human voice does not carry far. Under ideal conditions, perhaps 200 meters. In forest, with vegetation absorbing sound, much less. Tyler was 60 yards from the trail, close enough that his voice reached passing hikers, but not close enough for them to interpret his calls correctly. More importantly, the human voice does not sound human in the wilderness context. People who spend time outdoors are accustomed to hearing animal calls, bird songs, wind noises. They learn to filter these sounds out. When Tyler shouted for help, the hikers who heard him interpreted his voice as just another forest sound, not a distress signal. A whistle sounds nothing like nature. The sharp artificial tone of a whistle cuts through ambient noise and immediately registers as man-made. 3 short blasts of a whistle, the universal distress signal, cannot be mistaken for anything natural. Anyone with outdoor experience will recognize it instantly and respond. Tyler did not have a whistle. He had only his voice, and his voice was not enough. Here is what you need to understand about signaling. Carry a whistle on every trip, regardless of length, regardless of terrain, regardless of your level of experience. A whistle weighs less than an ounce, costs less than $5, and can save your life. The universal distress signal is 3 short blasts of the whistle, repeated at regular intervals. Anyone who hears this signal will know that someone needs help. They will investigate. They will respond. Your voice cannot replicate this signal. No matter how loud you shout, no matter what words you use, your voice will not cut through the ambient noise of the wilderness the way a whistle does. Your voice will be filtered out as natural sound. Your whistle will not. Attach the whistle to something you always have with you. Many people clip their whistle to their pack strap. Others wear it on a lanyard around their neck. Some attach it to their keychain. The specific location does not matter. What matters is that you always have it. If you are injured and cannot move, blow your whistle. 3 short blasts. Rest for a minute. 3 short blasts again. Continue this pattern for as long as you have the strength. Someone will hear you. Someone will come. Tyler Morrison shouted for 3 days and no one responded. If he had been blowing a whistle, he would have been found in hours. But what if you are already injured and alone without a whistle? Here is what you do. First, assess your injury. Determine whether you can stabilize it with available resources. Immobilize broken bones. Stop bleeding. Do what you can to prevent the injury from becoming worse. Second, make yourself visible. If you have fallen into a ravine or rolled off the trail, try to mark your position in a way that can be seen from above or from the trail. Bright clothing spread on vegetation. Rocks arranged in unnatural patterns. Anything that indicates human presence. Third, signal constantly. If you have a whistle, use it. 3 short blasts every few minutes. If you do not have a whistle, try banging rocks together or striking a tree with a stick. Create sounds that are rhythmic and artificial, sounds that cannot be mistaken for nature. Fourth, conserve energy for signaling. You may be tempted to try crawling toward the trail or climbing out of the ravine, unless you are certain you can reach safety. This is usually the wrong choice. Exertion uses energy you need for survival. Focus your energy on making noise and making yourself visible. Fifth, prepare for an extended wait. If you are off the trail and cannot be seen from it, you may not be found for days. Ration your food and water. Stay as warm as possible. Do everything you can to survive until rescue arrives. Tyler Morrison survived because luck finally intervened. Hikers happened to leave the trail at exactly the right spot to find him. If they had not needed a bathroom break at that particular moment, he would have died. You cannot count on luck. You can count on a whistle. Carry one. The 12th and final case involves one of the most common mistakes in wilderness travel: the failure to turn back when conditions change. The Henderson family, Daniel and Claire with their 2 children ages 14 and 11, were hiking in Big Bend National Park in Texas on March 14, 2023. Their plan was a moderate loop trail, approximately 6 miles, with a picnic lunch at a scenic overlook midway through. They started at 9 in the morning under clear skies. The temperature was pleasant, in the low 70s. The trail was well marked and easy to follow. By 11 in the morning, they had reached the overlook and were enjoying their lunch. The view was spectacular. The children were happy. Everything was going according to plan. At approximately 11:30, Daniel noticed clouds building to the west. He mentioned it to Claire, who checked the weather application on her phone. The forecast now showed a 40% chance of thunderstorms in the afternoon. This had not been in the morning forecast. They had 3 miles remaining to complete the loop. The alternative was to turn around and retrace the 3 miles they had already walked. Either route would take approximately the same time. Daniel decided to continue forward. The storms were not certain. They were only 40% likely, and the loop route was more interesting than backtracking. They resumed hiking at noon. At 1:15, the storm hit. It was not a gentle rain. It was a violent desert thunderstorm with lightning, hail, and flash flooding. The trail became a stream within minutes. The children were terrified. Claire slipped on the newly wet rocks and twisted her ankle. The family took shelter under a rock overhang and waited. The storm lasted approximately 90 minutes. When it finally passed, the trail was impassable. The stream crossings that had been dry in the morning were now raging torrents. They could not go forward. They could not go back. They were stranded in a desert canyon with an injured adult and 2 frightened children. They activated a personal locator beacon they had rented for the trip. Search and rescue reached them by helicopter approximately 4 hours later. Everyone survived, but Claire required surgery for her ankle, and both children developed lasting anxiety about outdoor activities. The trip that was supposed to create happy family memories instead created trauma. Why did Daniel keep going when he saw the storm building? He made a gamble and lost. He saw the warning signs. He checked the forecast. He had the information he needed to make a safer choice. He chose to continue anyway. The alternative felt like failure. Turning around meant giving up on their planned loop. It meant telling the children that they were not going to complete the hike they had started. It meant accepting that conditions had changed, and their plans had to change with them. Daniel did not want to accept this. He wanted the day to go according to plan. He wanted to complete the loop and give his family the experience he had promised them. The storms were only 40% likely. 60% of the time, they would be fine. But the storms came. And when they came, the Henderson family was trapped in terrain that became dangerous within minutes. Desert flash floods are particularly deadly because they arrive so quickly. A canyon that is dry can become a raging torrent in less than 5 minutes. You cannot outrun them. You cannot predict exactly when they will arrive. You can only avoid being in the danger zone when they hit. Daniel put his family in the danger zone because he was not willing to adjust his plans based on changing conditions. This is a common pattern. People create expectations about how their day will go, and they are reluctant to abandon those expectations even when circumstances change. Here is what you need to understand about changing conditions. When conditions change, your plan must change. The original plan was based on original conditions. If conditions deteriorate, the plan is no longer valid. You must create a new plan based on current reality. This requires a specific kind of mental flexibility that does not come naturally to most people. We invest effort in making plans. We anticipate outcomes. We tell ourselves stories about how the day will unfold. When reality contradicts those stories, our first instinct is to force reality to match the story, rather than adjusting the story to match reality. Daniel saw clouds building. He checked the forecast. He knew storms were possible. At that moment, his plan stopped being valid. The plan was based on clear weather. Clear weather was no longer guaranteed. The correct response was to turn around. Yes, this would mean abandoning the loop. Yes, the children might be disappointed. Yes, it would feel like giving up. None of these things mattered. What mattered was getting his family back to the trailhead before conditions deteriorated. He chose to continue forward because the alternative felt like retreat. But retreat is not failure. Retreat is responding appropriately to changing circumstances. The only failure is refusing to respond when response is required. If you are in the wilderness and conditions begin to change, reassess your plan immediately. Ask yourself, was this plan made for current conditions? If the answer is no, the plan needs to change. But what if you are already caught in a flash flood situation? Here is what you do. First, get to high ground immediately. Do not try to cross flooded areas. Do not wait to see if the water level rises. Move upward as quickly as you can. Second, if you cannot reach high ground, find the most protected spot available and wait. Rock overhangs can provide shelter from rain and some protection from rising water. Move as high within the overhang as possible. Third, if you have an emergency communication device, activate it. Flash flood situations can change rapidly, and rescue may be your only safe option. Fourth, do not attempt to cross flooded areas after the rain stops. Water levels can continue rising for hours after precipitation ends, as runoff from upstream reaches your location. Wait until water levels have clearly dropped before attempting any crossings. Fifth, if you must cross flowing water, use extreme caution. Flowing water is far more powerful than it appears. Water just knee-deep can knock an adult off their feet if it is moving fast enough. Use a stick for support. Face upstream. Cross at the widest, shallowest point available. The Henderson family survived because they had a personal locator beacon and activated it. Without that device, they would have been stranded in the canyon until the waters receded, which could have taken days. Claire's ankle injury could have become life-threatening without prompt medical attention. Carry emergency communication devices. Rent them if you cannot afford to buy them. The cost of a beacon rental is trivial compared to the cost of a rescue operation or the cost of your life. You have heard 12 cases now, 12 stories of people who entered the wilderness with hopes and plans and the reasonable expectation that they would return home safely. Some did. Some did not. The difference was not luck. The difference was decisions. Let me summarize what we have learned. When you are lost, stop moving. Make yourself visible. Signal. Wait. Your vehicle is your survival station. Never walk away from it in hostile terrain. Your phone is a communication device first. If you are in trouble and your battery is low, call immediately. Never split up after an emergency. If someone is injured, everyone stays together. Darkness is a survival condition. When you cannot see, stop and wait for dawn. Do not follow water downstream in mountainous terrain. Go up, not down. When you see weather building, turn around immediately. The summit is not worth your life. Experience creates overconfidence. The more you know, the more carefully you must respect your limits. These rules are simple. They are not complicated or technical or hard to remember. They are simple, common-sense guidelines that could save your life. But simple does not mean easy. These rules often require you to override powerful instincts, to stop when you want to move, to retreat when you want to advance, to accept discomfort when you could pursue comfort. Make your commitments now, before you are in the crisis. Decide in advance what you will do when the moment comes. Write it down. Say it out loud. Make it automatic. If I am lost, I will stop moving. If my vehicle is stuck in the desert, I will stay with it. If my phone battery is low and I am in trouble, I will call immediately. If my partner is injured, I will stay with them. If darkness falls and I am on an exposed trail, I will stop and wait for dawn. If I am in the mountains and lost, I will go up, not down. If I see weather building, I will turn around immediately. If I have extensive experience, I will maintain the caution of a beginner. These commitments are your lifeline. They are the voice of your rational self, speaking to your panicked self in the moment of crisis. They are the decisions you made when you could think clearly, binding you to actions that will keep you alive. Honor them. Your survival depends on it. The wilderness is beautiful. The wilderness is inspiring. The wilderness offers experiences that cannot be found anywhere else. The wilderness will also kill you if you let it. Not because it is hostile, because it is indifferent. It does not care whether you survive. That responsibility is yours alone. Take it seriously. Prepare thoroughly. Make good decisions. And come home alive. If you found this information valuable, share it with someone who spends time outdoors. These lessons save lives, but only if people know them. Subscribe for more investigations into what happens to people who enter the wilderness and do not return. And the next time you are standing at a trailhead, about to walk into wild country, remember what you learned here. The wilderness is waiting. It has always been waiting. It will keep taking people who do not understand its rules. Do not be one of them.